I'm Jaime Gómez, president of SPE. I'd like to welcome you to our last session of the day. We're going to have a panel with very distinguished members of the press. So we're going to have a great conversation for the next hour. I'd like to introduce the panelists to all of you. Start with Rhoda. Rhoda Miel is Assistant Manager, Director of Plastic News. She joined Plastic News in 2000, so make you a veteran now, Rhoda. And you were promoted to news editor in 2014. Again, to your current role in 2019. 1984 graduate of Central Michigan University, and she also worked for daily newspapers for 15 years before joining Plastic News. Our second panelist, Matthew, I've always confused, is it Naitove or Naitove?
Naitove.
Naitove, okay, thank you, Matt.
Okay.
It's Executive Director of Plastics Technology Magazine, where he has reported on virtually every aspect of plastics since 1972. Matt started at Plastics Technology as a cub reporter fresh out of school and rose through the ranks as to chief editor, a position he held for 28 plus years. His current editorial responsibilities include copy editing the entire issue, managing copy flow, maintaining beat coverage of flow molding technology, and recruiting speakers for plastics technology conferences. And we're going to talk about that. Matt is a graduate of Harvard College and holds a master's degree from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. He's a member of SPE and the Plastics Pioneer Association. Our third contestant, if I can say it like that, Norbert Sparrow. Norbert has been editor-in-chief of Plastics Today since 2015. He has more than 20 years of editorial experience in business-to-business media, starting with European medical device manufacturer and ultimately overseeing the editorial content for publications and websites serving the medical device manufacturing supply chain in North America, Japan, and China, as well as Europe. Norbert studied journalism at the Centre Universitaire d'études du journalisme in Strasbourg, France, where he earned a master's degree. Am I leaving Pat, you out, right? I have not mentioned Pat, and unfortunately, Pat, I don't see your bio, but why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Pat Toensmeier. I'm the current editor-in-chief of Plastics Engineering Magazine. I've been covering plastics. This year marks 35 years. I spent 17 years on Modern Plastics, where I served as a managing editor of both its international and domestic editions, and ultimately as the editor-in-chief for about 8 years. And for the last I don't know, I guess since 2003, I've been doing freelance work, not only in plastics, but for aviation and defense journals and other publications along that vein.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for agreeing to spend 1 hour with us, covering the plastics industry, having a good conversation about different issues. So I'll go straight to the point. I mean, my presentation, I don't know if you had an opportunity to see it, but also 3M's presentation. We touched on COVID, of course, that's the subject that is in front of all of us. So how has COVID impacted, good and bad, the plastics industry? And we'll start with you, Pat, since I have you in front of me right now on this screen. What are your thoughts on the matter?
One of the most impressive things that I've seen with regards to the response of the plastics industry to the COVID pandemic is just how fast companies were able to switch gears and begin to design personal protective equipment and other necessary items to guard against the virus and also to treat it within hospitals and other healthcare facilities. I think that you saw the true flexibility of plastics design, of plastics materials, and it always astounded me. Only really weeks into the pandemic, how many companies were coming out with necessary products to deal with the pandemic, and even were coming up with brand new products that would help improve the treatments. The plastics industry, of course, has a very long history in the medical market, and is just so much knowledge and capacity to draw from that I really think it made a huge difference, especially when you look at some other consumer products that were just plain unavailable for months and months.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Rhoda, what do you think? And if I could add a little salt to the question, what do you think would be the most lasting impacts, from the COVID situation?
I think the lasting impacts are really going to be the technology that is developed around COVID, not necessarily the treatment and such, but as mentioned, there was this big push to shift production, to begin, it's like first they went to 3D printing, and then they built the molds, and they built the molds very quickly to do PPE products. They began new production. And what happened around there was embracing new technology and the quick to market technology that had been out there, and people had said there's the potential to do these new things very quickly. But now you've got everybody embracing it, because they have said, we're going to jump on, and we have to have this mold ready in 5 days, and we have to test it remotely, and we have to set up a new machine remotely. All these different aspects that were now embraced, that were technically there, but everybody liked to do hands-on. Now you can't do hands-on, literally can't do hands-on. So what are you going to do instead? And so it's just been impressive to see the way that new technology has been embraced and brought forward production that much faster.
Great. Norbert, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I agree absolutely with everything that's been said. One issue maybe that I would throw in there is the way we look at the supply chain, and specifically offshoring. As you may remember, as we all remember, in the early days of the pandemic, there was a huge PPE shortage, and that was mainly because most of it was coming from China or Asia Pacific. And so that raised a lot of awareness, certainly in the general public, which then created some momentum to reshore, which, is nothing new. We've been hearing about this a long time now. But certainly, I think the industry itself has given it a bit more thought than it has in the past. In particular, when it comes to, and this is something that Harry Moser in the reshoring, it's the Reshoring Initiative, I think it's called, this organization, talks about the total cost of ownership, that companies don't necessarily see the entire cost. All they see is the cheap labor. But if you factor in the risk, the logistics and all of this, you might be underestimating the actual cost of your product by 20 to 30%. So again, nothing new, but I think people and industry certainly is more aware of this. I'm not naive enough to say that offshoring is going to vanish. We know that's not going to happen. And it may not even leave China all that much, because China has the infrastructure, it's got the skilled labor that neighboring countries don't. I'm talking about Vietnam, which people often say is a logical next step. But that, I think, so sum up, I would say, yes, I think companies are paying a little bit more attention to the risk analysis when it comes to offshoring, and that, to me, is an important factor.
Thank you, Norbert. And Matt?
Yes, well, reshoring was one that was certainly on my list, and another was the necessity of agility in manufacturing, which the plastics industry has certainly demonstrated over the past year. And one of the elements of agility, as was mentioned by Rhoda, is 3D printing, which is definitely gathering more and more attention from plastics molders and extruders. Also, just generally the need for agility in all of the types of equipment that people install. I think that we're seeing more and more emphasis by the suppliers of the equipment and by the buyers of the equipment. I need something that can be switched from one kind of job to another quickly. And that brings me to two other elements, which has to do with people in plants. Initially certainly up till now, there's been a desire or a need to have fewer people in plants, and therefore automation has been of greater and greater emphasis, including easy to implement automation, by which I mean the collaborative robots and cobots. And also it's given a push to one of the elements that we're going to discuss later for Industry 4.0, which is remote monitoring and service, remote service.
Right.
These have gotten a push from the
Correct.
past year.
Well, since I have you here, and I want to continue on with the COVID situation. You remember last year about this time of the year, March, we were going to be in San Antonio, Texas, ANTEC. Within hours, we at the leadership of SP had to make a decision. Do we push forward? Do we cancel the event? Within just a few hours, we went from a live face-to-face event to 100% virtual, and we were quite successful, I may say, with that. Now, COVID hasn't gone away. Still, as 3M showed, people dying around the world. Even though we're vaccinating and more people, but we haven't gotten to that level of herd immunity. So that's creating a little bit of flux for events. Some people that want to be risk takers, and want to go and make live events. Some others that want to take a more conservative approach and say, no, let's keep this virtual, like for example, ANTEC. What's your feeling about events in general, right, and going forward? How long is it going to take for us to go back to some sort of normalcy? But what is normalcy? What is the new normalcy in terms of events?
Yes. Well, the new normalcy is going to be more varied, I think, than we've seen in the past. Many or some companies have implemented virtual open houses, virtual trade shows for just their products, online training of customers, this kind of thing. And these will continue and may take the place of some of the in-person events that have happened in the past. However, my company did some audience research recently of subscribers to plastics technology and to mold making technology, which is a sister publication that's also plastics related. And 86% of the respondents came back and said that they agreed or strongly agreed that a major U.S. exhibition featuring the latest equipment and technology demonstrations was essential to their professional development. And more than 62% of the respondents said that they would attend a trade show at least once a year, if not more often. And fewer than 7% felt that a major trade show every 3 years was really enough. They would want to attend something more frequently. So we put out a press release, which I believe has hit the streets today, that we are starting a trade show in the Chicagoland area at the Donnelly Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont, which is something that, again, our research said is a preferred area because it's the heart of plastics processing. And so this is going to be next March 29 to 31, be 151,000 square feet of space. And it will, we hope for it'll be we plan for it to be an every year event except for NPE years. And we think there's a real hunger for in-person events. And
you think human nature is such that we want to be person to person rather than
absolutely
through platforms?
I mean, I found myself as a journalist that you can find out so much more at a trade show because people are in a mood to talk and to brag about what they have. And if you go home from the show and you contact the same person, you ask a question, you're far less likely to get the answer you hope for than if you were right there at that time.
All right, let's continue backwards as we were in Norbert.
Yeah, totally agree. Nothing can replace a live show, a live event. It's not just the show itself, it's the networking and the business relationships that occur during dinner or during having drinks. You meet people out, what do you call it? The virtual happy hour just doesn't cut it. It's nothing. Now, that said, my company has been quite successful in doing virtual events. We did a virtual engineering week not too long ago. We have virtual engineering days coming up in June. And they are very successful. They're very they're educational. They're obviously people find them useful. But honestly, for myself, I can't wait to get back to a show. And I totally agree with Matt. You find out so much more on the show floor talking to people.
Okay.
So there you go.
All right.
That's my take.
Rhoda?
I guess I'm going to take an opposite view a little bit. I do expect there's going to be a lot of, in person. There's definitely, like you said, there's a hunger for it. People want to really see other people. At the same time, you look at the expenses of setting up machines, of moving them, of sending people to different places, just a lot of the costs. And I'm not going to be surprised if some of the booths and stuff are going to be sort of scaled back, just because you look at something like Arberg put in an entire TV studio, which I don't think they would create an entire TV studio just for COVID time. I do think that's going to be used for other events. There may be a hybrid kind of thing. I'm just not going to be surprised if there's a lot more virtual that's going to continue. Even if, next year at, ANTEC 2022, I'm not going to be surprised if you guys are going to be still having a virtual component, just because more people can access your information virtually than can actually travel to the show. I mean, it's just that much easier to get information across. But at the same time, I'm looking at two different things. One is that, the organizers of FACUMA, which would be in October this year, are 90% certain that they're going to be able to have that show this year. So that's Germany in October. But at the same time, Oktoberfest in Munich has been canceled for the second straight year, and that's September. So, they're completely different events, because you have a lot more control over a show floor than you would over something like Oktoberfest. But I still see that there's going to be maybe not the same number of people. It's going to be a different format, whatever these are next time we go around.
Two components come into play here, for Pat, for you that last in this round of questions. One is the size of what Rhoda is mentioning. One is the size of the event. Is different to have, let's say, a local event in the middle of Kansas, where 100, 200 people will attend. A very different scenario for FACUMA or the K Show or MPE, where expects thousands of thousands, and now you have to consider everything with COVID. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect that you're saying, Rhoda, is some companies, and there were some executives that actually said this loudly, say, hey, all of a sudden COVID put a stop into all my spending, and I started looking as to how much money I was putting into K Show or MPE or what have you, and I said, guess what? During the past 18 months, I was able to conduct business and sell without investing all that much money. So, Pat, you got these two scenarios. What are your thoughts on?
I think basically there are some shows where you really have to have the in-person event. This would include the major shows, K, NPE, et cetera, et cetera. Certainly FACUMA, as Rhoda mentioned, that's always struck me as a show that would be very difficult to duplicate on a virtual basis, just because it's so heavily machinery oriented. But I do think that the past year has shown a lot of of people who sign the checks for exhibitions that you can still be fairly successful. You can still be very successful, actually, with a virtual show, and certainly I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these these open houses that are done by major wholesalers, for example, these are multi-day events. I think that Methods Machine up in Massachusetts is a good example. They have 3 or 4 days of this open house, which is basically a mini exhibition. They bring people in, et cetera, et cetera. They might just find that it's it's more cost effective. They and others might just find it's more cost effective to have it to be a virtual event. I think the kind of thing that, the kind of exhibition that Matt's talking about, which is basically a regional show, that's something that's going to be, hard to get a lot of mileage out of if it's only versatile, because you can't replace the personal element in all this. You really need to talk to people. You need to meet people, and you need to network with people. And last point, the one thing I think about is in 2003, at least one company, one major machine maker decided, it would be at NPE, but it was going to be a very scaled back presence, and they had live feeds from their machine shop, from their plant, so they could show people on big flat screen TVs, how a machine worked. And they may have saved quite a lot of money from having to ship the machines to Chicago. But the fact is, a lot of people, said they didn't get the same feeling. It's not, seeing this on TV is not like seeing it in person, seeing how a machine runs, having somebody point out this, that, and the other thing to it. So I think it's going to be still plenty of opportunity for virtual conferences or for virtual shows on the smaller venues. But I really think the higher up you go in terms of scale, there's no substitute for an in-person show. And if it's expensive, that's just the cost of business. That's how people will justify it. And it's usually a good expense to have.
They sell machines.
Exactly. And materials and
Yeah.
and anything else. Sure.
Well, some of us still need to kick the tires when we're going to go buy a car, right?
Exactly.
Well, let me switch over to the second phase of questions I have here, since I'm controlling my time. You all talk to companies on a daily basis, what's going on and what are the new developments, the new stuff that is coming up, the pipeline. What have you heard? What are the greatest things? Of course, if cannot be mentioned with names and all that, please don't. But what are the real advances in polymer science, polymer chemistry, polymer engineering coming down the pipeline that we should be, all eager to learn about? Pat, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, I think that what I'm hearing about is, the developments are more incremental in lots of areas. There seems to be a lot of work to improve the performance of some commodity resins, notably polypropylene and polyethylene. I know that there's a push on the higher heat resistant materials such as the ketones to enhance the performance of them, not come out with brand new versions necessarily, but just with upgrades to them. I think that you're going to see a continuing push toward automation, a lot of which will be driven by the industry 4.0 technologies that are out there. You can just do so much with the digital technologies that that would almost be foolish not to have this this kind of thing that's in your plant or on your machines for the benefits it can provide in quality and anticipating downtime, et cetera. I don't think industry 4.0 has really penetrated that far into the plastics industry. The larger companies seem to have embraced it, but I think that the smaller companies are the ones that probably need it the most. Are going to take a little more time because it does involve an investment. But I think ultimately it's going to become as common as as just about any other type of automation that you're beginning to see. And finally, I think you're going to see a lot more with robots, especially as Matt pointed out, the cobots. People are doing some incredible things to these platforms, and I think that all plants can benefit from having fewer people doing very mundane, repetitive jobs that that machines can do so much better. And it's like they say, it's a cliche, but you know, robots don't take lunch breaks or take vacation and stuff like that, and they're usually accurate all the time. So,
Matt, what do you think?
Well, I think, you know, I did a little bit of research today and looked at, you know, what kinds of articles have drawn the heaviest online readership in terms of news articles, new things that we've been writing about. And it was interesting to me to see that things related to sustainability and recycling have drawn very heavily, including any kind of technology, molding technology, for example, that helps to deal with PCR, you know, helps to process it better controls, this kind of thing. Additive manufacturing or 3D printing is drawn very heavily. And some other interesting topics. One relates to machine safety. We did an article on tension indicating bolts for mounting molds that have the potential to greatly improve the safety of when you've got heavy molds in big machines with a heavy stripping force that tends to pull the mold off the platen when they open. This is a very interesting development that's not even expensive. And another thing is two areas that I consider to be two of the black holes of or last frontiers of injection molding process control, which has to do with true indication of melt temperature. There have been some advances in this area lately, which our readers have been very interested in. And a parallel area is mold temperature control, actually knowing and controlling the flow in all the different circuits of a mold, so that you actually get the mold temperature that you want and everywhere that you think you want it, which there's conformal cooling, which is going to influence that heavily as a new thing. So those are just some examples.
Yeah, Rhoda?
Well, like Matt, I could say that I took a look at our most popular stories, and they're resin pricing, resin supply, resin pricing, and resin pricing. So that tends to be the key driver in news these days. But I would say that, you know, one of the things that I come across is looking at technology that can help you meet something your customers are looking at a couple of years down the road. I mean, that could be incorporating PCR resin, as Matt mentioned. You know, the folks at Plastech have been out front in terms of, you know, presenting that to their customers, because they know that their customers are getting pushback on doing more recycled resins. So you got that going on. But the thing I tend to see most in terms of technology is, you know, again, the cobots and automation, just because there are fewer people in the plants. They want to make their resin go further. They need somebody that's going to, well, machines that are going to be there if they can't get people. And, you know, a lot of the next generation of workers that are coming up are much more comfortable with robots and with technology and with bringing those things in-house and handling smart technology. All of these kind of things they're much more comfortable with. And I fully expect that, you know, as this generation starts, you know, making more decisions, that they're going to be investing more in those areas.
Norbert?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned earlier, I have a long history in the medical manufacturing supply chain. So since joining Plastics Today, I still tend to look at advances in medical that are enabled by plastics. And there's obviously quite a lot. And one that I just learned of quite recently is some research at Purdue University, where they have integrated biosensors into a contact lens that will monitor your medical condition. So specifically glaucoma being one, and it does it painlessly, and it does it constantly, continuously. Now, this is still a basic research, you know, they're not commercializing this, obviously. But the idea, the notion that you could have this little plastic disc that corrects your vision and keeps tabs on your medical conditions, I thought was pretty spectacular. It's just one more example of how plastics have enabled or or will enable advances in medical technology. Of course, if you go back in history, single-use devices, thankfully, have made medicine so much safer for patients, and just done so much good. And it's good to remember that, because we in the industry, of course, especially as journalists, we hear a lot of anti-plastics activism and rhetoric. So that's always something I like to point out to those people, that just imagine the world of medicine without plastics.
Right. Yeah, and I said it in my presentation, it's basically impossible. If you go to a hospital and you purposely ask not to be handled, not to be touched, not to be taken care of, with anything made of plastic, your odds are, pretty bad, I would say. So,
Yeah.
but all four of you have brought in a subject that is, quite important. As we're dealing with all these advancements and all these things, and all of you have mentioned one way or another automation or Industry 4.0, or and this is something we've been hearing for the past, I don't know, maybe 5 years. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, and and now the new term, the new things is, what is it? Lights out plants and stuff like that. And you probably read this report recently, by the Deloitte Insight reports on understanding the skills gap. So we're also hearing that past the pandemic, we're on a pickle, because a lot of people are close to retirement. They basically chose to retire, and with that goes a lot of experience and knowledge out. Then some others that are actually prefer to take a check from the government and going back to work. It is what it is. So that is creating, in general, a shortage of employees out there, and it's a significant shortage that may impact, the plastics industry, or for sure it's going to impact the plastics industry. How do you see this in lights of automation, and where are we in automation? Are we making great strides to automate our plants, or is it going slowly? I think one of you mentioned not so. Maybe the big corporations are thinking about this and have the resources to do it, but not so much in the middle or small companies. So what's your take on automation, shortage of employees and all that? And since I have you on the screen, Norbert, why don't you start?
Sure. Well, I don't know if I would agree with that companies are not investing in automation, especially the smaller and mid-sized companies, because with collaborative robots, prices come down so much. It's really affordable for many companies, and the cobots, as we like to call them, are very adaptable. They can do any number of things. They can work side by side with the people in your factory. So I think, and I saw an industry report just the other day saying that installations of collaborative robots, it grew by 11% last year, or the last year that they have a record of anyways. And its market share was still only 4.8%. So it's in its infancy and growing. So I think there you have some movement. But as far as the people part of that equation goes, this is something we write about a lot, the skills gap, the labor shortage. And there's a number of factors at play. One of them, which thankfully isn't as big a factor anymore, is this notion or this image that a lot of young people have, even older people, actually a lot of older people, this kind of Dickensian vision of manufacturing, that it's somehow this dirty factory with horrible conditions, and that's just not true, as we all know. It looks more like a video game these days, than anything like that. So thankfully, the industry has found a way to change that perception. Initiatives like Manufacturing Day are great for that, because they bring school groups in to visit the factories and give young people at least the notion that perhaps there's a career here, and you don't have to have massive student debt or college debt, and you could actually make a really nice living just in a nice environment where you're doing something good for society too. So anyways, those are the two thoughts that come to mind
Okay.
on your question.
Matt, let's switch to you.
Okay. Well, I think automation and robots and this sort of thing is definitely going to help, but it will not solve the personnel problem. So there are things that industry is just going to have to do on its own. They can't wait for government or academia or anybody else to solve it for them. And the companies that are approaching this are doing in-house apprenticeship programs. They're paying for some of their people to get educated at community colleges and this kind of thing. They have open houses and internship programs for local high schools. They do cross-training of their employees so that everybody can do almost anything. So it makes them more versatile and they need fewer people overall. And as Norbert said, when you have a clean, well-lighted plant with using modern equipment and robots, this tends to encourage younger people that we're not talking about the dark satanic mills that William Blake wrote about. But I want to point out one other thing that hard, or I should say mechanical automation is only half of it, or even maybe less than half of it. I see data automation of information is really the key element of Industry 4.0 that is actually happening today. And we're talking about the remote monitoring and service dashboards everywhere. I see dashboards on the shop floor. I see dashboards on the wall so all the employees can see what's going on. I see people have got iPads or just phones where they can monitor what's happening in the plant. Data gives you the insight to regulate your business. Data is money. I visited an automotive processor who says that the value of not missing a shipping date or overproducing or underproducing parts can be $10,000 a month for an automotive manufacturer like him. Automated data collection eliminates human errors and omissions. And here's a key one. Once approved, process settings are repeated exactly on every run. They're downloaded from a central MES computer. You don't have to have a guy going through a checklist and setting all these different dials and settings. There's no unauthorized changes to the process allowed. And you see, it's still a relatively small number of plants, but it's going to be more and more. And that is where they can set up not just the machine with the mold, but also the chiller and the blender and the loader and a number of different auxiliaries can be set up all at once because all of that's been made part of the setup. And then the other thing, which is still new, but we're going to see more and more of is condition monitoring. And that is knowing what's going on with the machine and when something is nearing the need for replacement before it breaks. You don't run till it breaks. That's the old-fashioned way. They've got technologies for example, monitoring screw wear without having to stop and pull a screw out of the machine. They can do it ultrasonically and things like that. So
it's copying something that we've had in the automotive industry for many years. I mean,
vibration monitoring to know when a drive is or a bearing is going to fail. Yeah.
Your oil light comes on. It says, great. Pat.
I think that I basically have to agree with Matt and Rhoda and Norbert on most of the things they said. One point I would make, and I'm beginning to hear a little bit about this, and I don't know how seriously, at least at this point in time, to take it, but there is some talk about introducing more artificial intelligence into the operation of these machine shops, or not machine shops, manufacturing plants. And, I think this would just basically be a major escalation of a lot of capabilities that some companies offer now, either, in terms of having preset programs for different types of a primary and secondary equipment, so when you do want to make a changeover, you can very quickly do it and not have to worry about the settings or anything like that, because everything's been preset. So I would say that, perhaps in the next few years, we should look for more examples of artificial intelligence trying to be introduced into these manufacturing programs, certainly into the data programs. I think that Matt is exactly right when he says that data is money. I would say that data is, the spring from which everything else flows. If you know what you're doing, you can really make your plant a lot more efficient, a lot more productive, and certainly a lot more profitable. So I would say look for more artificial intelligence trying to be introduced, and the benefits this could have in terms of further taking humans out of the equation in terms of at least the setup, and the machine monitoring, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's funny you guys are saying that, because it's like, I don't know if you listened to John Wagner in his presentation, but the chemistry is the chemistry. What Matt was just saying, right? Once you have the chemistry down, just leave it alone. Don't touch it. It's always going to be the same. What we need to do is reproduce what John Wagner was saying. The environment does its work. Let it be so, and let it be reproducible, repeatable over and over, and don't mess with it. And it seems like this is the case. But you guys bring up a good subject that, for somebody like me, I spent so many years out of school and got so much into debt, because of going through a master's degree and a PhD and all that. And yet, Matt, you mentioned, apprenticeships, internships, cross training, community college, where, right now with the 2.5 million jobs available, et cetera, for people that are required, they got to have some sort of a, basic training, a community college and all that, but they can go out there and actually make a decent living out of it. So do you see more that in terms of a strong push towards community college, towards just a regular bachelor's degree, plastics technologists, let's call it like that? Is that what is needed, rather than so many PhDs trying to secure a job in a laboratory of a major corporation?
I think so. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think technical training that's related to actual jobs. I mean, functional technical training rather than theoretical technical training is something that we need proportionately a lot more of. And I think a good way to do this is for companies, if they can get kids right out of high school and get them on board and say, look, we will pay for you to take night school courses, over time. And, you could get an associate's degree greatly and, get into a supervisoring job, greatly increased salary. I think, this is all a good way to go.
That brings a subject in your maybe Pat or Norbert. I mean, you get information from abroad. You're in touch. I mean, you were educated in France or Strasbourg. Our education system is a little bit different than the European, or a lot different. Working for a former company in Switzerland, you would see that the high school kids would start moving into university, but it was not like the approach we have here, that is all theory. You actually were asked to work at a company, and companies are basically engaging these people, because that's the system in Switzerland, where you have to work part-time and part-time take classes, whether it's in accounting or whether it's in engineering. But that's the system, because they don't want so many people full of theory when they graduate. They want hands-on and all that. Should we be doing something similar here in the educational system?
John, asking me?
Yeah, sure.
I think so. I'm certainly now. I didn't. My education, just to explain, I only went to university in France. I actually I went to school here, so I know the American education system, and I know higher education system in Europe. But I would say, like, Germany is a great model. Their apprenticeships, the engineers are respected, and they have apprenticeships and internships and technical schools that are really top notch, and it's free. Well, relatively speaking, the students themselves don't pay; it's paid through taxes. But France, it's not quite the same. But also, so to answer your question very, very simply, yes, I think technical schools, community colleges, and there are some forward-thinking companies in the U.S. Mac Molding comes to mind. They do a lot with local schools, local high schools even, and to kind of help them with the curriculum and tell them, here's what we would like our future workers, what skills we're looking for, what it would be great if you could teach them this. And there are others, their names escape me right now, but there's other companies, other molding companies that are very proactive in that regard. And I think it's something that we should encourage. Absolutely.
Thanks. I'm going to jump to the last subject, which has got to be with sustainability. Since we have, sorry, Rhoda.
You skipped over me before, and this is I was going to say, I want to get on my soapbox here when it comes to, getting workers, just because this is something I see again and again and again. It's company owners and executives who get onto social media and complain about millennial work ethic, and complain. It's just like, oh, they're always on their phone. Oh, they always want, they need to be coddled. They can see what you're writing about. You're doing this on Twitter, and why are they going to come work for your company then? This is something where a lot of people seem to be misunderstanding, and go back to the question of education. Is, are you offering them opportunities to learn something and then move into a new position? Or are you just saying, yeah, they're just, all they want is another $1 an hour or something? Even today, I saw something where somebody posted what they thought was a clever ad from somebody saying they wanted people, but they don't want to hear about you can't get a babysitter, and they don't want to hear about you got a flat tire, and they don't want, you've got to be able to, find out, does this employee have a problem we can help them out with? This is a good person. Let's invest something in them to give them a reason to invest in us. So that's my soapbox, and now I'm going to get off it. Okay.
No, that's actually great, because it gives me the trampoline to jump into the next. Since you mentioned millennials, this generation, has received a lot from us from the past. All the technology, you pretty much see an exponential curve. Some of them, for example, don't even know CDs, because CDs came and went so fast that said, what's a CD? But one of the things that they have embraced, is sustainability. Is the love for the planet and stuff like that. So what I'd like to ask all of you, and start with you, Rhoda, since I have you in front of me, is the issues about plastics and the environment.
Yeah.
Peel back all the rhetoric, right? What are companies really doing about it, other than feel good statements and painting the facade green, right?
Yeah, some of them are just doing a lot of greenwashing. That is going on, and it's very frustrating for us to sit back and say, okay, well, this company has pledged. It's like, okay, we're going to be 100% PCR by 2030 or something like that. But they made that same pledge 10 years ago and 15 years ago. They keep saying it, and it's not really happening. So, that is frustrating to see, but there is interest out there in terms of, in terms of recycling, in terms of chemical recycling. I think there's some good opportunities in there, but of course it's so early, it's hard to tell just how well that's going to come off. And to sort of piggyback onto what we were talking about before, millennials, every single person in our Rising Stars that we do every year, I would say at least 80 to 95% of the people say they want to be involved in sustainable activities within their company. They want their company to look at ways that they can do more thin walling, or to do a metal replacement, or something else that's going to improve the sustainability. And as a plastics industry, to draw them in, I think you have to look at that yourself and say, okay, what can you do to help us out? What can we do to bring you into our sustainability story? And we will help you find a path for sustainability within our company. Sort of embrace their interest in that, and see where it goes.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Pat. Piggybacking on the same question, anything you hear from the companies, that are they actually doing anything with their products and services to really turn them green?
Actually, I think that there's a lot going on. Some of it is, perhaps a little over the head of the general public, and I'm not, saying that to be condescending or anything. I'm seeing some very encouraging things in recycling technology that are going to make a difference. Some of it is old, like chemical recycling, but which is now in an era where it's being upgraded tremendously. And lots of companies are investing in these chemical recycling systems, or looking at using them, for the simple fact that you can probably pretty much make, almost full use of waste plastics and turn them into new polymers again. Certainly there is a lot of effort, amongst the retailers and I think the brand owners as well, to develop and to promote packages that use less material, but are still as effective in terms of barrier properties, shelf space, et cetera, and which can also be recycled a lot more easily. I think one of the biggest problems we have, certainly in the United States, and I think elsewhere as well, is there is no real effective infrastructure for collecting and recycling products. Until we get that, until we get people, politicians especially, who are prepared to promote common sense solutions to these things, I think the companies will be doing a pretty good job, but it's not going to work unless there is a legitimate recycling infrastructure in place, and that would include mechanical recycling as well as different types of other technologies. But we need the infrastructure. I am seeing a lot of things, even people who are claiming they can recycle difficult materials such as polystyrene and polypropylene and turn them essentially into new materials. So yeah, I think there's a lot happening. It's not widespread, but it's happening enough that it is going to make a change, I believe.
Great, thanks, Norbert.
Yeah, totally agree. The one, I guess I don't need to go into. That's all a fact. One issue, I guess one pet peeve I have, and we have a columnist who calls us out a lot in Plastics Today, are the compostable materials. Supposedly, these materials will degrade within a time frame, but it's under certain environmental conditions. The time frame is never quite. It can be quite long, and they can't be collected in the recycling stream. So I mean, what's the point? It's that's sort of greenwashing to me, and I wish companies wouldn't do that, because the general public already is suspicious of corporations saying they're doing good. If we give them the evidence that we're not doing as well as we could, it kind of defeats the whole purpose. So that's my only addendum to what has been said, with which I totally agree.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, well, there's so many elements to this sustainability thing. Norbert was just talking about compostable materials. I would just say renewable resources is a larger context for that. And there are biomaterials, which, ranging from the green polyethylene to PLA, PHA, this kind of thing, or use of plant-based waste as a filler and this kind of. There's a lot of this going on, but at this point, it's relatively small scale. It's more, I think, marketing based than anything. And it's technically based because the economics are not really great. But you can. I mean, there is really stuff out there. I mean, Coca-Cola's plant bottle, which is 70% bio-based now, and eventually it'll be 100%. So that's one aspect of it. Recycling, there are definite gaps and holes in it. Some of them are being plugged up. There's a whole consortium being formed to recycle polypropylene, which I think has been one of the biggest failures of recycling in North America anyway. You see a lot of the resin companies are either doing their own recycling, they're investing in chemical recycling, or they're buying recycling companies. You see some of the biggest plastics processors, bottle makers particularly, who have their own recycling operations, people like Alpha, people like Graham Packaging. But there's another aspect that the plastics industry can do on its own, and that is to minimize the unnecessary use of materials. And you could just call it lightweighting for short. And a radical example I saw at the K Show, it's actually been promoted here in the United States now, and that is, if you could picture a margarine or yogurt tub with an in-mold label, but the label is a very stiff cardboard, essentially coated on both sides with polypropylene, and it becomes the structural part of the plastic. So you only have a thin skeleton in the four corners that's actually injection molded, and you've got 70% less polypropylene than you would have in a normal tub. And I did a little checking, and I think a lot of people in the general public don't realize that, for example, a trash bag, a consumer can liner, is now half the thickness of what it used to be, a dozen or more years ago. Your T-shirt shopping bag, the thing that everybody's looking to ban all over the place, including in New York City where I live, is again half the thickness of what it used to be. Or take people hate single serve water bottles and this kind of thing. Well, these have slimmed down by 60 to 70% in recent years. In fact, if you go all the way back to the mid 80s, a half-liter bottle weighed 28 grams. Now it's 5 grams today. A half-liter carbonated soft drink PET bottle has been trimmed from around 25 grams, again down to 10 and a half. Your 1.5 liter soft drink bottle has gone from 32 down to 24 grams, and a 64 ounces hot fill bottle has shrunk from 68 to 59 grams. I mean, there are just an awful lot of examples like that. In fact, even the caps have, everybody knows the bottle caps are a lot smaller than they used to be. Again, they've shrunk by like 40, 50%. So people don't really understand what the plastics industry is doing to use less plastic.
All right. Plus, what they don't want to hear about is that less plastic, even if it's some plastic, is replacing a lot of other materials that were being used before and wasted, or they cost more, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to close with just one very short sentence from each of you. Let's start with you, Rhoda. What can we read in your publications that are coming up? What can we expect?
Well, we've got next week's issue is going to have profiles of the 10 incoming Plastics Hall of Fame members, which that's been interesting because one of our newest employees, who's been with us for almost 2 years, had a chance to do those interviews. So you had, I think she's technically a Gen Z, not even a millennial. So she was doing that, and she's got 2 small kids and doing it over Zoom and learning about plastics history all at once. So that's something we've got coming up.
Great. Pat?
The June issue is going to have an article by one of our writers named Bob Grace about how often in product design there's really not much consideration given to women, what they need out of a product. And this isn't just a stereotypical complaint type article. Bob has spoken to a number of design professionals, many of whom are women, and they point out that there is a real lack of consideration for what half the marketplace, i.e. women, need in a lot of products. And in some applications, such as gear for construction work and stuff like that, the failure to understand what women need, because they generally tend to be much smaller and less heavy than men, et cetera, can cause serious injury, even death sometimes. So this is going to be a good read for people, and it's a good subject. I think it's something that needs some thinking about, because you can't discuss plastics without discussing the applications plastics are used for.
Correct. And we had a great talk this morning by Wesleyan Greer, who
Exactly.
right in line with that. Excellent. For you, Norm?
Well, I'll just keep it short. We don't have a print edition, so every day we start from scratch. Whatever is in the news, whatever we want to dig into a little deeper, and that includes everything we talked about here during this 1-hour session. And the other part is going to be returning to live events. We've got 4 events coming up in North America in the second half of this year, so we're going to have tons of news to report from from the show floor.
Perfect. And Matt, to close?
Close. Well, I think closer integration of additive manufacturing or 3D printing with processes like injection molding is one of the things that's happening, and it's happening both in terms of using additive techniques to actually be able to injection mold parts that were impossible before, and another is improved technology for 3D printing metal tooling for injection molding that goes way beyond what people have been able to do before. There have always been limitations in 3D printed tooling. An area that's a particular enthusiasm of mine is simulation, and this is process simulation is getting much more sophisticated. It just boggles my mind when I see the degree of detail that's going into that. And what we're seeing is the beginnings of a trend. I don't know how far it's going to go, but several of the major machine suppliers are trying to build some degree of mold flow type simulation into the machine controls.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be an interesting one to see. And personally, if I had my druthers, what I would really like to see is blow molding and thermoforming advance in simulation along the lines of injection molding. There is some out there, but it's very limited in terms of scope and in terms of its penetration. And I just hope they can do more with that.
Well, Rhoda and gentlemen, thank you very much. We're on top of the hour, so our feed to Swap Card was cut off, but the recording stays, I believe, and will be transferred to all of us. I'd like to do my little commercial at the end. I'd like you to point to this wonderful book by a former editor of plastics engineering, Michael Tolonsky, and our member of the board, Connor Carlin, Plastics and Sustainability. So for those of you who will be listening to this recording later on, please get your copy. It's a fantastic book and addresses a lot of the issues that we were talking about on sustainability. Rhoda, Norbert, Pat, and Matt, thank you very much on behalf of SP. Thank you for your time and your candid answers. I hope you had a good time with the conversation. I did. I took a lot of notes. Not that I want to your position. I'm not a journalist, but thank you so much. Applause to you. And with that, we're signing off, and have a good day. Have a good rest of the afternoon, and we'll see you at ANTEC tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Jaime.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.